The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're joined by a singer-songwriter, performer, Mr. Ari Hest, along with Judy Collins. He has an album. It's Silver Skies Blue. We thank him so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
So you're originally from the Bronx?
Yeah, I grew up in sort of the northern part of the Bronx, close to Yonkers. Yeah, I was there really my whole childhood, and then eventually kind of moved around the boroughs, but started in the Bronx.
When did you find out that you could write songs?
I was about 17 or 18 when I started to write music, and I think at first I wasn't so sure if I could write songs because the people who were listening to me play them gave me some faces that are hard to describe. And they had much smilier faces if they heard me play a song they already knew. So I wasn't so sure about my ability to write songs until I started booking my own gigs based on my original music, which I guess was in the middle of college, maybe around 19 or 20 years old.
And typically when you write songs, you write by yourself? If yes, although that seems to morph depending on the time of my life. Currently, that is the case, but if I befriend somebody who I think is a great writer and we are able to spend more time together because they're, living in New York for a while or I'm somewhere for a while, that could change a bit. But most of the songs I've written are solo, yeah. In many of the songs here, you wrote with Judy Collins.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you first came to know Judy Collins.
So I played a festival in New York in 2012, and I knew that she was the headliner, but I really didn't expect to even really meet her that day because I was the first act on a 5-act bill. And I think what happened is that she, on her way into the place, getting herself ready for the show, she overheard me playing, and I guess she thought to herself that I would be a good opener. Lucky me. So she asked me to open a show, and that became more shows because that one went well, and so on and so forth. Obviously it's come to this place that I can't even believe, where I'm putting out a record with her. Incredible.
The last album she did, the duets album, Strangers Again, that's a song you wrote.
Strangers Again is a song that I wrote actually with a guy named Marvin Etzioni. And that was back in 2003 or so that I wrote that song. So it appeared on a previous album. And, Judy, one of the things that she did without me even knowing, I mean that in a good sense, she looked at my back catalog after listening to what I was doing on stage, and she found a bunch of my old albums and really enjoyed them and picked out a few songs that she liked in particular that she might want to do with me. And Strangers Again was one of them, and so we just decided to include it on her duets record.
And tell us a little bit about that song's inspiration. What's it about?
Well, I think it was written with a friend of mine named Marvin Etzioni, and I think that originally he had the idea of, I suppose, just writing about someone who you have gotten so close with over the years, but your relationship with them has taken a turn for the worse, and you're trying to figure out, what to do next, and you're just so overwhelmed by it that you kind of feel like you wish for that moment that you never even met them. So it's pretty heavy, pretty heavy idea. I liked it because of that, and we started to write the lyrics together, based on that.
And on this album, Silver Skies Blue, what is it like when you sit down with Judy Collins? What's the process look like?
So the process was generally one where usually it was me who would come with a musical idea that was not totally finished yet. Something that had maybe some guitar chords and melody and a very simple outline of how I thought we might sing it together. And then she would add a little bit of musical ideas, maybe changing a chord here or there, maybe changing some sort of melody line. And then the lyrics was generally something where we really worked together. I would come over to her home studio. We would just sit down there. I'd be on a guitar, she'd be on a piano, and we would just really try to work on each line. And many times we would think we were finished with the song, and then we decided, you know what, this needs something else, and I would go back. And it helps that we lived, at the time we lived only about 5 miles from each other, and really live still, pretty close to each other, so we can continue to write. That's how these songs were put together, generally over a period of a few sessions with her at her home studio.
I hope you take this as a compliment. The song Silver Skies Blue, it sounds like a song that could have been written many years ago.
That's great.
Yeah, it sounds like is this a new song, or could this be an old folk song?
Yeah.
Was there a certain sound that you guys were looking for?
The truth of it is that I first thought to write a song for her to sing. I didn't have the idea that we would make a record together, but I thought one day, you know what, I'd like to write something that maybe she would want to sing. She's made so many songs. She's done such incredible versions of them and has had so much success with them and enjoys doing so. So I decided I'm going to write a song that, thinking about how she sings, how that would work. And I started writing Silver Skies Blue, actually. That was the first song. And we got, I got most of the way in with that song, and she did a little touching up at the end. And I can see why you would single that one out as something that might sound a little bit like something from her heyday. And, there was a reason for that. And in my brain, that's how it all started.
Mm. Now, is there a particular track, a particular song from the album that you're especially proud of?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch, but I think that the one that seems to have the energy together, where we are just completely connecting on stage and the recording as well, and it's from the get-go has been a real pleasure to sing with her every single time, is the second track, I Choose Love, which I think, it just has a melody that works very well for both of us to riff off each other. And I really enjoy singing that song with her. You could just tell when we're singing that one in a live setting how much we're enjoying that.
There's another one that you wrote by yourself. I was listening to Aberdeen earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about the inspiration on how that song came to be.
Sure. When I first started to play, this goes back to what I was talking about, booking the first few original music shows. About 15 years ago or so, I started playing a lot of universities and small colleges in the Dakotas and in Minnesota. The reason for that is there was an agent that I befriended that had some connections with the people who book shows in these places. So he booked me on sometimes it was a tour in the middle of winter, and I'd be in quite a bit of weather panic trying to get around, but I was still having a ball because it was my first real touring experience. And then I arrived one day in Aberdeen, South Dakota, to play at Northern State University. And that particular show, I had a bunch of the kids come up afterwards, and they were just astonished that somebody from New York would even come up there and play for them. And they were so curious about living in New York and really just living in a city in general, because their town was pretty small, and a lot of them hadn't even left that vicinity. So they were so curious, and I thought it was an interesting parallel that they were itching to kind of see the rest of the world, and I was this big city kid who was itching to go on tour because I was kind of getting tired of the grind of New York pretty early. So we had a common bond there. So that's what I started writing about.
When you tour and you play all these different places, do you find yourself curious about the people that go to see you play?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I enjoy learning about the history of the people that I meet, in towns in Northern Ireland, and they talk to me about the the fighting that they've had with Southerners, or it depends on the places in America that I've played. Obviously, there's some with richer history than others, but it's very interesting to not only hear their stories, but also just watch their reactions. I mean, my music doesn't necessarily work in every single place I go, or it's not the most popular thing, most popular kind of music in every place I go. So it's interesting to learn about the history of what their traditions are musically and what they, how they live.
What would you say the hardest thing about being an artist is?
Nowadays I think that the hardest thing is remembering why you're doing it and connecting back with that every day. And I say nowadays because I feel like even since I started, things have shifted so dramatically where I have to wear a bunch of different hats. I'm not just a musician. I'm a promoter. I have to learn how to run my own website. I have to book gigs sometimes. I have to, whatever. There's just a ton of, I've managed my own career at times. There's a lot of stuff that I'd rather not honestly have to do, but I can't afford to hire somebody to do it. And suddenly you find yourself wearing a lot of different hats, and you can lose track of why you're doing it in the first place. And honestly, this record that I'm doing with Judy is great in the sense that there's a little bit of a pressure off me to wear all those hats. I can kind of just connect with the musical side of things. And, obviously Judy being the legend that she is, so many people love to go out and see her play. And when we do our shows, I'm introduced to this whole new crowd, and I don't have to worry about getting them in their seats. This is basically someone else's job. So I can really, again, focus on the music, not just the writing and the recording, but also the live shows with her.
You said a couple of times there, you said remembering why you do it. So Why do you do it?
For me, I think it has to do with my nature of being an introvert. Growing up, I did not connect well with other kids. I was a very nice kid, but I just didn't talk all that much. And really that even if you met me today and you spent some time with me, I think you'd describe me as a rather quiet, solitary person. But, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to say this, those things seem to shift when I start to play music, and I feel like I open up a lot, and it's really therapeutic for me. So that's why I do it. It's definitely something that's therapeutic for me, and I also see that at this point I'm in my late 30s, and I see that the people around me that I grew up with, most of them have more money than I do, but they aren't as happy with what they do because they do something that doesn't really help people all that much, or they are just bored with it because they don't really have a passion for it. And I just feel very lucky to do what I do.
It seems like a lot of times people who go down a non-traditional route in life, like being an artist, being a musician, being a performer, other people will say stuff like, "Oh man, I'm jealous of you." And they don't realize also the tremendous sacrifice that it takes to do this type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But I think that's just going to be the case. I mean, I'm not surprised that they say that. I mean, if you think about all the other things that I could be doing with my life to make a living, I'm not surprised that there's a lot of people out there that feel kind of trapped in what they're doing because it provides them with a living. Maybe they're taking care of their families with it, but inside there's something that just doesn't feel right because they're not able to express themselves in the way that they want to.
What is the greatest compliment you've received?
There have been a handful of times when after a show, I'll meet somebody who's been through some sort of extremely traumatic experience, whether it's, the death of a loved one, or they are fighting cancer or something very serious, things that I have either not experienced or barely experienced in my life. And if they tell me that my music was able to get them through a certain time or is getting them through a time, it's the heaviest and best compliment that I could think of, because that, talking about helping people, that's kind of what I mean by that. I it's not so much the people that casually listen to my music while they're doing whatever in their apartment. It's more the people that get life-changing help from, even if it's for a 4-minute song, they can kind of like connect with what I'm doing, and that's a big deal, for me to be able to do that kind of thing for people.
This is kind of an open-ended question. For anyone who's listening to this broadcast, what would you say to them? Totally open-ended.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for listening to it. I don't want to bore people with go out and buy my new record or anything like that. I guess I would just say that, I hope that if you do listen to what I do, that your life is enriched in some way. And that's really it.
Well spoken. My last question. Who is Ari Hest?
It depends on the day. I think I'm like most people, that some days I wake up really moody. My wife would tell you that for sure. And I don't realize my full potential, at least for that moment, or maybe it's the whole day or whatever it is. But, I think I'm someone who is good-hearted and is always trying to do the right thing. And sometimes that gets me in a jam. I think my parents raised me pretty well. I don't know. It's a hard one. You ask somebody that kind of question, and there's so many different ways to go with it. But I feel good about how who I am, and even if I'm having a bad day, I feel pretty good about Ari Hest.
Very good. Well, actually, I kind of lied, because there's one question I would like to ask you.
Sure.
Well, maybe two, but you said sometimes you wake up and you're moody.
Yeah.
What would you say is the greatest source of angst for you?
It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the fact that music is this therapeutic thing that I can get a lot of frustrations or just in general emotions out. And if I am not around it and I need to connect with people to do certain things, and there often is frustration. I mean, again, I'll go back to my wife, Chrissy would definitely tell you that there's times when she wishes that I could communicate things a hell of a lot better than I do. And unfortunately, our lives are not such that I can just sing everything to her. So there are moments like that for sure.
Well, then the flip side, in just your day-to-day life, what would you say the greatest source of joy is?
Well, I think it's, at this point in my life, I think it's more and more it's family. It's remembering where you came from and connecting with family. And I wouldn't have always said that. I think I didn't always have the best relationship with, especially with certain people in my family. And I think at some point you just realize how short life is, and you have to overcome those feelings like you can't handle these people. You have to figure out ways to connect with them no matter what. And when I connect with my family each day, hopefully each day, it's important to me and become more and more important.
Well, thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Thanks for all the questions.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.